I wanted to start off with like something that I saw on Twitter recently. Sometimes I get really frustrated by the Twitter search. I tried to find the tweet, but someone at a library conference recently tweeted, "Data science does not equal tools," right? And at first I said, well, that's an easy comment to say, like yes, that's true, but I also think it's unfair. So try. There we go. Because I think tools are important. One thing is that I started a program called Data Scientist Training for Librarians, which really takes that approach, right, of trying to understand what our researchers are going through in their life cycles. So, how are they trying to clean data? How are they trying to analyze it? How are they trying to present it? And so I think the tools are a really great way to demonstrate some of those concepts as you're trying to work with them, trying to understand open science or open research. And actually that's the life cycle I just wanted to mention today too. We sort of organized the rest of the talks by that sort of simple life cycle, which is extract, wrangle, analyze, present. I want to show you just recently let's see where there's Safari. Recently, we held a data scientist training for librarians in Copenhagen. The European librarians are really excited about it. And there's a blog story about their experience, right, trying to learn. This is our badge. It's actually modeled after Nancy Pearl. 1 is a spear, 0 as a shield. But this is the location too. We had a lot of paired people like trying to use these tools, ranging from OpenRefine to later on you'll hear about Jupyter. So it really is it's a really overwhelming experience, but I've heard from many people that the end of the day, the goal is achieved that really they have an understanding of the life cycle. So I'm trying to find my Acrobat now. And this is something at the Center for Astrophysics. We have a group. It's called Seamless Astronomy, and we really. I'll show you our website for that really later. But we really focus on looking at the life cycle, right? So this is I always like showing this slide from Alberto Pepi, who was in our group, the Seamless Astronomy group, of demonstrating like what we were trying to do in our group, which is trying to understand how our researchers are working, the tools that they're using. So you can really see from the cradle to the grave of how astronomers, first they're working with the actual instruments, the pipeline of data. They get the raw data, they process it, and then they're doing some analysis. And at the very top there is the library, right? And I think our idea was that the library really needed to start hooking into these different parts of the life cycle, really to capture what the researchers were doing. So I mentioned Seamless Astronomy. This is a group of astronomers and librarians and programmers, and in these sessions we actually talk a lot about tools. We talk about how can we integrate that? How can we make research more efficient? How can we just make the whole search and discovery process better? So one of the examples, I guess you can say, is this is an old one, the Virtual Observatory. In case nobody knows this, it actually has concluded pretty much. It was a big project to do these kind of things, the interlinking of tools, interoperability in astronomy, right? And this is a good example. This SAMP, Simple Application Messaging Protocol, is a good example of how astronomers are thinking about this this idea of tools interacting with each other to start. And then, I mean, one thing that this SAMP tool does, it's a protocol, so it sits underneath all your tools, and it allows basically one tool to communicate with another one. So if you're gathering data over here, then it can start being visualized and analyzed in another place. This protocol was sort of like the precursor. I mean, really, it still says 2012, but nowadays we have more infrastructure, right? We have APIs, you know, where you can actually tap into other services. You have webhooks and all these kind of things that people are using now to sort of hook into science, into the research process. And I don't know if you've heard of this project, the 101 Innovations in Scholarly Communication. This is a group that's trying to collect all the tools that people are using, and then they put it into this colorful wheel here. Which is, I mean, it really demonstrates the explosion. I think what this visualization does is it demonstrates the explosion of tools, right? This is, I think, something that we're being overwhelmed with right now, is that the research community is really starting to adopt the web, right? I sent along that video earlier for earlier viewing of Michael Nielsen's talk about just how the web is changing how researchers do things. And this is a demonstration now. The research community is really tapping into these new tools to do things. And that's actually what they say in their study, is that it's just exploded, right? It's exploded, and it's hard to keep track of many of these tools. And some of them are being purchased by publishers, you know, by vendors. So, you know, we're seeing those come up in our library, you know, some of our library conferences, they're pitching the tools. And but the other part of their project is to understand, you know, what type of researcher you are, so gauging what kind of tools you use. You know, I think in general that I think it's nice to know all the, you know, what they're tracking, but in general I think it's very hard to really do a study like this, because I think, you know, in some ways people, there'll be bigger communities, and they might sway the study in certain ways with the tools that they use. But that's just a nice example of all the tools that I think were being inundated. So I don't know if you saw it in the tiny print that was up there, but there, oh, that's the wrong one. There was one tool that that pops up in there, and I just wanted to highlight it because I mentioned Alberto Pepi. He was a researcher that worked with us in our group, and I think he's a good example of one of these people. He believes that we're doing science the wrong way, you know, like that people are using LaTeX still, and this is this ancient language that we're still sort of forced to write papers with. But it was much more than that. He believed that a paper should be more dynamic, you know. The paper, the article hasn't changed in so many years, right? Many, many years, back to, you know, like 300 years ago or so, even longer. And so he was very much interested in how we can, you know, how we can do sort of science in the new, right? In the open, where there's comments. And so I'd just like to point out, this is a concept paper. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but it was a concept paper from our group using Authoria, the tool that he created, to sort of demonstrate, you know, some of these ideas. There's a way to see, this is an important concept these days, I think, of versioning, right? So you can actually see in a sort of GitHub-like way, and I'll talk about GitHub real quick later, but, you know, differences between the files, right? That's not a good example. That was a really tiny change there. But in general, it's like this is an example of how actually programmers are working and how coders are working, and now it's becoming part of the writing process. And this commit idea is something, he really integrated it again too, hooked it into GitHub, so you can actually sync your paper up with GitHub and do your versioning in there as well. So there are some other concepts in this paper of the future, just to mention, like there's some overviews of what different tools do. Linking to data is something that our group was very interested in, which is we were seeing that link rot was happening in the literature. People were linking to data on their personal websites. And so we did an analysis and found that a lot of these links were, and I'm trying to find that it's not in here, but there was a lot of link rot that we saw going back, and as you would understand, right, that if you're linking to your personal website, that could be a problem. And so it really helped us understand how we could actually do different things to integrate sort of repositories, other things to help the researchers deposit their data and preserve it better. And so, these are the two examples that we that we used in the paper, the Harvard Dataverse and Zenodo from CERN. And I think, I know Matt's going to talk about Jupyter Notebooks later on. This was another interesting thing that Alberto Pepe felt strongly about too, which is reproducibility, right? The paper is actionable. You can go in and actually reproduce the code, the data, like rerun everything that the researcher has done. And so you can actually launch an IPython notebook, which is sort of an interactive tool that people are using now, if it comes up. So I don't know what's happening here, but it should launch, there we go. It should launch a virtual environment where your notebook is running, where you can actually reproduce, you can run the code and walk through the data. The other thing about Authoria is very experimental. So it's a great idea, it's a great concept. Sometimes some things break, but I invite you to look at that later and try it out. And there were some other things in here as well as doing a D3, and this is a interactive data visualization tool, right, to sort of select data points and play with. So, I think we need a paper of the future part 2 now, because it's already old after a year or so. But I think it's a nice example of some of the hooks that we're using. One of the other things too is you can tap into Crossref and get your references very quickly in Authoria, and that's another infrastructure tool that Authoria is tapping into to create more of an integrated tool. So I mentioned GitHub. And this, I'm happy because no one actually is talking about GitHub. And I know this forum is more about open tools. Git is open. GitHub is a company, a private company. But they have a philosophy, much like a lot of those tools that I showed you before. They have an open philosophy. If you're doing stuff in the open, it's free, pretty much, until you get to a point where you like it so much that you have to pay a fee. But GitHub is a tool that actually programmers were using for a while, coders, where they were actually working on software projects, sharing their code, versioning it, collaborating together. And it's a great tool for sort of versioning, seeing what the differences are in your code, but it is also being used more for documents. I see a lot of teachers using it now, and I think Matt will talk about that part. I won't steal his thunder. What my point is with this is that GitHub is a tool that's really used by the community more and more now these days, seeing the explosion. And I think it's very important for libraries to see these kind of, these sort of core tools and tap into them to sort of also collect I hate saying this, but scientific output of some of our researchers. And in a more robust way, instead of waiting to the very end, doing it when they're doing, when they're working on their research. And I really appreciate this project. This is a guide that was put up by Arfon Smith at GitHub. He was formerly at Zooniverse, which is a citizen science group, and now he's at GitHub, and he's doing a lot of great things there now. And one of them was he thought it was a shame that so much of science is built on top of all this programming work, all the tools that people are building, and yet there's no way to give credit. There's no citation, this traditional mechanism in academia to credit your researchers for doing all this work. And so he knows that GitHub was being used heavily, and so he worked with Mozilla and then also with CERN to create this sort of hook into GitHub where you can actually create, let me see if I can show you here. This is an example of this on button up here, like of just creating a hook, allowing Zenodo to see your GitHub repository, and then vice versa. And then once you do a release in GitHub, it gets a DOI, it gets preserved. This has been a really great, I think it's been really well adopted by researchers. The amount of software that's been deposited inside it has sort of exploded. I've seen the interest in it, and I think once you have that example, you can think of other things, right? Like if researchers are using GitHub for teaching, can we hook into that and get the material, get a DOI, allow them to cite that? And guess who's done that? That's the Software Carpentry Group. They've done that. They've used that tool to actually make their material citable. It's up on GitHub and it's open, and they do that. They use that mechanism. So it's really, I think this is a sort of groundbreaking, idea, I think, in libraries. And I think the other thing that Zenodo does is it actually produces what is called a code meta file. It's a JSON LD, JSON linked data file, right? And it allows you the person who has that repository to have that metadata in their GitHub repository. And after that, you can actually use GitHub to do pull requests or to change the metadata in a more collaborative way. So authors, other researchers, librarians, it's not a closed process, it's an open process. So collaborative curation is the thing that I think we're going to see more of. So I wanted to show you enough of me. I think this is a kind of a nice video, a demonstration of what I'm talking to you about right now. This is a group called Riffin, and they make lab software. And I just think it's a great...
Computers have revolutionized how we make things. Architects used to draft these by hand. Today, they use design software. In fact, there's design software for almost everything, from making airplanes to printing dinosaurs.
But what about lab research? The laboratory is a little bit old-fashioned. We think it's time for something better. Meet Riffin. Good morning. Hey, guys. Riffin automatically sends our data to the cloud and then maps it into my scientific procedures. That makes it easy to understand where it belongs and what it all means. Riffin also tracks my measurements and warns me about potential issues. Glad we caught that one. Riffin also allows me to collaborate with colleagues. We can share both our methods and our results without hunting through spreadsheets. In fact, every trial we've ever done is automatically compiled and analyzed together, like one giant experiment, so we never miss an opportunity for discovery.
Problem solved.
Riffin didn't invent the cloud. We didn't invent statistical analytics. But we are putting them to work for the people who did invent them, scientists and engineers.
I think that last part is really what gets me, is that it's so funny that academic research has been so slow to adopt what is happening in the online world, right? In industry, and so they say that like we should be using these tools, right? And we're going to hook into them, we're going to use them in a more integrated way to make science better, right? To make research better. And so I'm sorry it's a private company, but the idea I think is a great one. I think the video is a great demonstration of this idea to hook into different things. So it's not only, I think it's not only that the tools are very important to helping the research process, improving it, also for libraries to sort of hook into and capture things. I'm also hearing from our postdocs and our graduate students, there's anxiety about academia in general being full, like there's nowhere to go. And I think there's sort of an interest anyways, that they're all kind of becoming more entrepreneurial. And so there's an interest from them in learning more of these tools, doing things differently. And it's been on our radar. Like there's an actual report called the Postdoc Experience. I think the postdocs have had anxiety for years. This is nothing new. But I think the real concern these days is that there's really just I guess academia is just too impacted. It's just too full, and so they're wondering about their future industry. What skills can they have on the outside that will get them hired? Even our astrophysicists are nervous about this. From Harvard, from Harvard Smithsonian, they're nervous about this. I had a meeting yesterday with one who was nervous about this. So I wanted to show you, actually, I think this is a great, see if I can move this up.
More importantly, I think libraries are kind of vaults of knowledge, and librarians are there to hold your hand and guide you through what you find what you're looking for, even if a lot of the time you don't really know exactly what it is that you are. In terms of my own research, the things that I would find useful are things like training events. So I know a lot of researchers use GitHub. How do I start using that workflow? That's something that I could do through the library. And even just having a knowledge of what technologies are out there, things like new systems such as IPython, new programming languages like Julia, are these things that I should be adopting, or are these things that I should be staying away from? So that's the kind of thing I'm looking for, and they're the kinds of things that would help me the most in my research.
This is one of our postdocs, and actually we taught a course on what Matt will be talking about later together. So it's definitely something I see more and more now from our graduate students and postdocs, that they're interested in these tools and making their own work better, because they have a lot of pressure from their PIs, from their advisors, where most of the work is being done by them, and they want to improve how they do things. But also, they want skills that they can use on the outside, in the outside world. You know, one thing I think about a lot these days is your repository something common? You know, are there tools in your library that are common out there in the world that they can apply? You know, they can, if they move to industry, can they take that as a skill and use that on the outside world? So outside of academia. So I just want to finish, hopefully, with just the fact that I think we need to. I think it's not a bad thing to think about these tools, and I think they are integral to the process. At least for us as librarians, we need to understand this better, and I don't think we should discount them. I hope that other librarian was saying that as well. And Twitter is one of those things where you can't get the full context of the conversation. But I do think the tools can guide you to some pretty big concepts of how you should change, the way you do things. So that's it. Any questions? Yeah.
I didn't understand everything you were saying, but I think the thing that I would like to see us be able to do is to figure out if these thousands of wonderful tools are the most likely to succeed, right? I mean, how do you choose which ones to teach or learn, or, I mean, that seems like the most important tool is how to assess the tools, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a hard, it is a hard, I'm not sure that anyone has that really fully figured out, because you also have domains that use specific things, and that's one thing that I often look for, is this is something that can be used across domains, but the other thing is through partnerships with your community, like understanding, hearing what they are interested in, tapping into that, and but a lot of them come and say they don't know about, they're just completely perplexed. They don't know about all these different options out there, and I think the difficulty is that tool going to last for years, right? Ever more important for librarians to be involved, right? Because what if they're using these things and we're just not capturing anything, and a lot of that content is lost, right? One of the things I worry about most these days is about all this gray literature, and I kind of include software in there and other things that people are just posting in different places, and the library sort of lost touch with that, right? Because we're not in this world anymore, there are libraries that are in that world, but I think in general it's hard for us to tap into this and do what the researchers are doing using the web to hook into all these different things. So I don't know if I answered your question. I think sometimes it's if there's someone dedicated at your library, or someone that can monitor this stuff. There are people on Twitter. I think Twitter is a great place, to find out about these things. That's how I do. I follow certain people like Caitlin Thaney, or Arfan Smith, or Ian Mulvaney, or these open science people. I follow them, and I find out about things through them, and that's extremely helpful. And then I try to decide, is this something think that, and have conversations with your scientists or your graduate students. But yeah.
Well, just to follow up on her comments, it made me think of what software lies behind these tools. What's the interoperability issue? Are they all based in Excel, or not all, but are some based in, it kind of brings up the old sort of collection development principles. Like who's authoring it, where is it coming from? Is it from a publisher? Is it just collaborative? Is it, the next 8-track tape? Or so as the librarians in our sort of selection role, it seems like we ought to know something about the kinds of principles behind the development of that, so we can make some judgment calls.
Well, the good thing is that these tools are actually starting to keep that provenance, right, of all that information about, what environments to use, where, who captured this. It's not the best still, but that is something I think the community in general is interested in, is that, somehow that information is captured and carried along, with it. But they're all open web. Well, they're the web programming languages and other things like that that a lot of people are using these days. They're just common tools that people are using, like JavaScript or Python is one that's very popular in the astronomy community. These are languages, right? Just using all these off-the-shelf kind of things. And why not? Because they go to these forums and they get a lot of help. They get a lot of guidance from the web, right? It's all there. A lot of information on how to learn how to do these things and attempt to do your own thing. And it's all there.
What about security issues? I work for the government. Nothing gets inside our firewall too easily. All that data got stolen from the other place. But I mean, is that some researchers are very private about their data? We have to, as librarians, advise them about what's more secure or less secure.
I'm so lucky. I'm in astronomy. But to answer that question, yes, a lot of these are insecure at first. Their mission is to really.
It's a two-edged sword of collaboration, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so a lot of the tools that we use nowadays, like you think of Twitter, or, these kind of things that started off as startups, right? Security is less on their minds at first, right? And so I think they are open to security threats, and as they become bigger, I mean, I don't think anyone is able to say they're 100% secure. I was at the years ago, I used to work at the Supreme Court Library, and Rehnquist had this rule that his IT, if they couldn't tell him that it was 100% secure, then he wasn't going to do it. And so they had two networks, and they kept one. And that was an interesting thing. I clearly like web technologies, right? It was an interesting thing for me to have these different environments, but we made it work. We made it work. And I always like that example too, because in general, I think it's good that we learn about these things, because in the eyes of our researchers, we look more advanced, and they so like one thing that happened at the Supreme Court was our IT told us that we couldn't use these databases, the local databases, right? And they'd been telling us it would take too long. It was this and that. And I tapped into these SQL data, I used SQL, I tapped into these SQL Server databases, and in a meeting showed them that we were able to search all these databases. And then they took us seriously after that. It was a good example, and after that they were much more willing to do things. But in general, I think with our researchers, I found that the tools are, that when I talk to them about that, it sounds like we're very current. They really, they like the consultation. They like to know about these things.